Good afternoon. My name is Ariel Mathis, and I am presenting research conducted with Anna Papafragu on the intentionality effects on event boundaries. Daily life, from morning routines and daily commutes to social exchanges and interactions, can be viewed as a series of events. So one definition of an event that aligns with this description states that events are temporal entities unfolding at a specific time and location that are conceived by an observer as having a beginning and an end. Events can happen at different levels. An overarching event, such as getting ready in the morning, might be broken down into several smaller events, such as brushing your teeth, getting dressed, and making a pot of coffee. Each of these sub-events can be considered a standalone event as well. So how do people identify events? According to a prominent model, event comprehension is an ongoing process that is facilitated by the use of multiple simultaneous event models that are held in working memory. These models are used to predict near future occurrences, and they are adjusted whenever there is an increase in prediction errors. These increases correspond to the placement of event boundaries as people view events. Much of the information we have now about event boundaries comes from event segmentation tasks. In these tasks, participants see a clip and are told to press a button when an event ends or when an event changes. Sometimes they are told to segment the smallest meaningful events. So in this example, using a short segment of the video used in Levine et al. 2017, each movement the skater makes could be considered an event. So every slide of the skates, every movement of the hands, the lift of the leg, every turn on the jump. So on the other hand, if participants are asked to segment the largest meaningful events, the button might only be pressed when she lands her jump and has completed her goal of making that jump. Event boundaries can be determined by perceptual changes in the input. These include changes in movement, characters, locations, or interactions with objects. Event boundaries can also be influenced by inferences about an agent's intentions. So we know that adults adjust their level of segmentation depending on how familiar they are with an actor's intent. We also know that infants parse everyday actions by placing boundaries at the points where a goal is achieved. However, there are two issues with using classic segmentation studies to look at the role of intentionality in event boundaries. First of all, the role of intentionality is hard to isolate in past literature because the roles of perceptual and conceptual cues to event boundaries are typically intertwined. So higher order changes within events, such as the skater landing her jump, are also accompanied by distinct physical changes or the changes in movement that come with her landing her jump. The second issue is that most previous event segmentation studies have used film segments, but it is difficult to present an agent's goals explicitly and naturally within such segments. So ideally, in order to address the hypothesis that a salient goal might affect placement of event endpoints, the goal information within the event must be both explicit and also able to be manipulated in isolation from the physical components of the event. In the current experiment, we asked whether intentionality affects event boundaries. We use a new paradigm by presenting our stimuli in a way that isolated intentionality from other cues such as movement that have been shown to affect how boundaries are recognized. Specifically, we presented participants with a context sentence that introduced an overarching goal of an agent, such as Jesse wants to eat an orange for breakfast. Then people were shown images depicting an event at a stage of partial completion, such as this image of a partly peeled orange. They then had to answer a question about the event. So in this case, did she peel the orange? Critically, the event in the test question was an intermediate step or sub-event in fulfilling the agent's overarching goal. We were interested in whether previously stated goals would affect participant answers. So in our current study, 54 undergraduate students who are also native speakers of English participated in the study. Our stimuli consisted of visual depictions of 3 types of event outcomes. The first being the incomplete events, such as this image of an apple that has not been packed into a lunch bag. Partially complete events, such as a partially peeled orange, and complete events, such as a pop balloon. Of these, incomplete and complete visual outcomes were fillers, while the partially complete outcomes were targets. This choice was made to use the partially complete outcomes as targets in order to explore context effects on outcomes that had a degree of visual indeterminacy. The degree of visual completion for all items was determined by a previous norming study. In the norming study, we asked a separate group of 18 participants to assess the percentage of event completion after each image was presented. And in this case, we asked participants, what percent did she, or what percent did he pack the apple, peel the orange, pop the balloon? For incomplete visual outcomes, this estimated percentage was very low, so it was around 8%. For complete visual outcomes, however, it was very high, so around 93%. And for partly complete visual outcomes, it was intermediate low, so around 27%. For the main experiment, each visual outcome was followed by a test question in the perfective aspect that required a yes or no answer. So each visual outcome image was preceded by a context that stated the agent's goal. In this case, we used sentences that included verbs such as want or plan. For each filler, there was a single context. For instance, in the first example here, where the apple has not been packed in the lunch bag, our context was Megan plans to take her lunch to school. After participants saw the image, we asked, did she pack the apple? On the opposite end of the scale, for our complete fillers, we told participants that Grayson wants to scare his little sister with the balloon. And after seeing a picture of a popped balloon, we asked participants, did he pop the balloon? For each target item, or these are the partly complete visual outcomes, there were 3 possible contexts. The neutral goal context simply included the information later found in the test question. So in this case, Jesse wants to peel the orange. Low goal context introduced an overarching goal that could be satisfied even by a so in this case, Jesse wants to use an orange as a garnish, where a small amount of peeling an orange can yield enough for a garnish. Finally, high goal context introduced a goal for which a greater development of the sub-event was needed. So in this case, Jessie wants to eat the orange for her breakfast, where the orange needed to be completely or almost completely peeled in order to be eaten. We predicted that participants would be more likely to deny that the agent peeled the orange when the agent's stated goals involved a higher degree of sub-event development, or in this case, eating the orange for breakfast, that requires all of the orange to be peeled, as opposed to a lower degree of development, as in use the orange as a garnish, where even a small piece of the skin is enough. We chose to use a forced choice task for this study. There were 54 trials total. Of these, 36 were filler trials, 18 with complete visual outcomes, and 18 with incomplete visual outcomes. There were also 18 test trials using partly complete images. Of these 18 trials, there were 6 trials each for low goal, high goal, and neutral goal contexts. And just to clarify, each participant saw each event only once. The goal context types were counterbalanced across 3 lists, so all context types were seen for all events across participants. So I'm going to go ahead and show you the basic trial format. So first, participants would see a fixation point, and they were told to advance by hitting spacebar when they were ready. Participants then read the linguistic context at their own pace and pressed spacebar. The image then popped up on screen. The context also stayed on screen, and this part was timed. So after 500 milliseconds, the question came up on the screen as well. Participants chose the response using the keys on their keyboard, D for yes and K for no. So this screen remained until a response was selected. Participants were able to see the context, image, and question at the same time. Once a key was pressed, the fixation point for the next trial appeared on screen. So we first analyzed data just by the visual event outcome types. And so in this case, the visual outcome contrast as predictors. For responses were coded on a binary scale of yes and no. We collapsed across context for the partly complete items for this analysis. Unsurprisingly, the observable degree of completion of the event affected whether viewers assessed that the event boundary had been reached. So for partly complete visual outcomes, these elicited yes responses significantly more often than incomplete outcomes. And complete outcomes elicited yes responses significantly more often than partly complete outcomes. From this, we found that visual information clearly affected the placement of event boundaries. So now expanding this to the effects of context. For our context analysis, we tested, or we looked at only the partly complete visual outcomes. So we got rid of the incomplete and complete outcome data here. So the partly complete, and we used context as our context contrast as our predictors. So partly complete visual outcomes paired with a low goal context elicited more yes responses compared to those paired with a neutral goal context. No significant difference was found between neutral goal and high goal context. In other words, participants were more likely to place an event boundary at a partly complete outcome if the outcome satisfied the agent's goals. All right, so our findings clearly show that intentionality affects the placement of event endpoints. Low goal context allowed viewers to place event boundaries earlier in the event timeline than neutral context because the agent's goal was satisfied. Our data are also consistent with the position that higher order information affects event boundaries, but our paradigm reveals for the first time the unique contribution of goal information by eliminating confounding cues such as motion from the stimuli. So a question that was raised by our data is, why did the neutral and high goal context behave identically? So the most likely explanation for this is that the neutral goals aren't truly neutral, but actually imply a context. So in this case, we believe participants attribute either a common goal, such as peeling the orange to eat, or a maximal goal, such as peeling the orange to its natural endpoint. If so, it makes sense that neutral goals and high goals behave the same. This is because high goals would lead to identical expectations. Our findings also provide evidence that event information can be reliably extracted from a single snapshot of the event outcome, in this case, the affected object. However, we also found that the state of the object does not objectively determine the progress of the event. Intentionality also matters. And finally, the present study shows that contextual factors shape the interpretation of perfective descriptions of events, such as peel an orange, in language. These findings can explain variation in perfective interpretations that have been observed in different languages across both adults and children that have so far remained poorly understood. So we would like to thank the members of the Language and Cognition Lab for their input, and we would also like to thank all of you for listening. We will be answering questions in the chat for the next few minutes. Thank you.